I remember during the pandemic, we saw George Floyd, then it moved to anti-Asian hate, and then it was the Mexican border issue, and then the Muslim in the sea. And so I just saw this rotation of the different communities that were being attacked. It takes solidarity of all these different cultures. We have to pull them together in solidarity to make the big difference, to really make an impact in addressing racism, sexism, misogyny, all the things that affect women of color. And so that's why we really focus on that part. Yes, it's an Asian American, Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander organization leading women of color efforts, which you don't see.
This is Associations Thrive, the podcast celebrating successful associations and their leaders. I'm your host, Joanna Pineda, CEO and Chief Troublemaker at Matrix Group International. Listen in as top association executives tell all, revealing the creative and innovative ways they're increasing membership, generating revenue, nurturing engagement, and reimagining their organizations. By the way, if you've launched a new initiative, created new member services, or updated your governance structure and are seeing great results, I want to hear your story, and so do my listeners. I'd love to have you as a guest. Go to podcast.matrixgroup.net and apply to be on Associations Thrive. Now let's dive into this week's show. Today, I'm speaking with Sue Ann Hong-Whitaker, President and CEO at the Center for Asian Pacific American Women, or CAPAW. Sue Ann, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for the invitation, Joanna. I appreciate it.
So tell us about CAPAW.
Well, first of all, I have to start off just by saying I have something very in common with you, Joanna, and that is that we both flew to the U.S. by ourselves when we were young.
Yes.
And that's significant because I think that I learned very early on the ability to be independent and to be able to come to a foreign country, learn English, be adopted by my aunt, and then to have a strong role model in a female Asian American who actually made her way in this country. That really resonates with me and stuck with me in the way that I grew up and as far as my career. So that was significant. So I wanted to bring that about. And as far as CAPAW, the Center for Asian Pacific American Women was incorporated in 1995. And it was founded by Martha Lee, our founder, who used to be a Kellogg Fellow. And she saw that there were still issues in the mid-90s of sexism, racism, and the fact that regardless of whether people had a PhD, higher level education ability, these stereotypes got in the way. And the fact that, number one, they were not invited to leadership tables. And number two, not to decision-making tables. So she created at the time an organization called the Asian Pacific American Women's Leadership Institute. There was also a parallel institutes for Latinas as well as African American women. And this was to really support these women. And she didn't want them to be alone. So guess what? She asked 100 of her friends to fund $100. And she actually had these warrior sisters who helped start the entire organization. I don't think she imagined that in, almost 30 years, which is our anniversary next year, that her organization would still be thriving and existing and that there would still be a need for it. And so this is where I think this is an amazing story, one of growth. And the fact that our mission is to invest in AANHPI women and women of color to build personal power and to then go out and support and change the world by fighting against systemic racism and making the world a better place for the up and coming generation.
Sue Ann, I had Con Vu, who's with SACE, the Society for Asian Scientists and Engineers, on the podcast a few months ago, and he said that Asian American women are the least likely to get promoted. What is holding us back? What's the myth, the stereotype?
The stereo of AANHPI women are that we keep our head down. We don't speak up. We don't ask for what we want. And we think that hard work on its own will be enough merit that will get us what we deserve. And guess what? It doesn't work that way. I come from corporate America. I had some pretty good success in a Fortune 50 company, but I know what it also took when I had great periods in my career and then not so great periods in my career. And the thing that we don't have is the network. The sponsorship is lacking, as well as the fact that we need mentors all along the way who give us the tips and hints and the things that we don't get and nothing's in writing. These are the political landmines. And this is also where at the beginning of career, from the beginning, and they call it the broken rung. The lean-in.org and McKinsey study calls this the broken rung at the beginning of career when we do not get the same thing that a white male gets in terms of career advice, the connection. We are isolated and we're not confident that unless we can check every box, that step from the individual producer to that first line leader, it takes longer for us to get there.
Well, it's an interesting comment that you made about checking every box, because there are 2 women in my organization who I actually wanted to promote. And I said, I'm offering this position to you. And both of them said, I'm not sure I'm qualified. And I said, wait, hang on. I think you're qualified. I would like to give you the position. And they said, are you sure? And I thought, yeah, I'm pretty sure. Otherwise, I wouldn't be talking to you. And it took another woman basically saying, I'm going to kick your ass if you don't take this job because this is an amazing opportunity. Your boss thinks you're qualified. Take it, run with it, own it.
Think about how many Joannas are out there saying to their immediate direct report saying, oh no, number 1, you deserve it. Number 2, I see potential, not just the current expected performance of what you're supposed to be doing, but what else am I seeing in the future for you? And I see these glimmers of potential leadership, but they don't see it. They don't see it.
No, you're absolutely right. Because if I had been a different person and somebody said, I'm not ready, that person would have said, okay, let me know when you're ready. And I'm going to pass over you and give it to somebody else.
Exactly. And the fact is, I don't think our counterparts, our male counterparts, they check 46% and they're like, yes, I qualify. We need to check the 99 and 100%.
Right.
To say I qualify. And that's what we're seeing.
Well, also, I think, and this isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I think in many ways, men of all colors are a little bit literal. If a woman said to them, I don't think I'm ready for this job, they'll say, okay, I believe you. Why wouldn't they believe you if you said, I don't think I'm ready for this job?
Absolutely. I think that it takes somebody who really cares about that individual to push them beyond what they're currently thinking they're capable of and to help them see the vision of their future selves. And that's what you did. And that's what we need more of, everyone listening.
Yeah.
So don't wait for somebody to come to you. Maybe you need to reach out to them as an action item.
Right. Sue Ann, we're going to talk about all the amazing things that CAPAW is doing under your leadership. But before we do that, I want to dive into your journey. So how do you get to become president and CEO of CAPAW when, especially as you said, you come from corporate America?
I do. And so I was with a Fortune 50 company for 28 and a half years in about probably 5 or 6 different capacity. And at the end of that career, I was a leader over property and casualty, auto total losses on the auto claim side for half the country. So I had like 600 plus employees plus another 1,000 independent adjusters and whatnot. 95% of my life was work. And guess what? I did not manage that well. However, the other thing was, as many organizations do, there was a reorganization of the entire company. So when we went through the reorganization, the offer that came back to me was 1 level below what I was doing for almost 10 years as a department head. Now, it wasn't a lot of money, change. I could have stayed where I was. So it wasn't about that, but I really had to evaluate my self-worth. And if I said yes to that role, I had to say yes without regret, without resentment. And I decided I couldn't do it. So I decided I'm going to bet on myself. And I had no clue what I was going to do next. But I said, oh, and by the way, there was a package. So I did say, okay, I'll take that package. And so once that happened, I literally said, I have no clue what I'm going to do next. And I had to also, by the way, work my parents through this whole change, because the way that they measure success, which is very Asian, is how high you go, how much money you make, position.
And how quickly you move.
Absolutely. Now, when you talk about leaving a company without a plan, they start to raise their eyebrows and say, what? What are you talking about? So I got lots of coaching from them as well. I think what convinced them was that my health was failing because of the amount of work that I was doing and how much traveling I was doing. So I said, if you want to continue for me to go like this, then my health is in jeopardy. And I think that's what really ultimately convinced them. So 2 days after I pushed the button says, yes, I'm leaving, I got a call from a retiree of that company, as well as she was also serving as president of a very large organization, Asian American organization, and also on the board of CAPAW. And she said, what are you doing right now? And I said, I am absolutely clueless what I'm doing right now. And so she said, well, come over here and figure out, be the interim executive director. We just lost our executive director. So come here, do the work and figure out what you want to do.
Wait, hang on. Did she know that you were looking for a new opportunity, or did it just happen by magic?
She didn't know until I talked to her when she happened to call me. And so I was like, timing was just incredible. And so when she said that, I was like, well, let me think about it. I've never thought about working at a nonprofit before. Let me think about it. So within 1 week, I said, yes, let's do it. And remember, I am a graduate of this organization's programming back in 2001 and 2002. So I had a connection to the organization.
So you were familiar with CAPAW?
Absolutely. So that's how I got there. So there were times that I accelerated very quickly in my career. And then there were times like towards the end, I was struggling because I didn't have a sponsor. And so it was one of those things where I said, I know what I can do. I know what I'm capable of. So let's do this. And with lots of tears, I always call it almost like a divorce, because think about it, almost 30 years. You know, the fact that I was choosing to leave, that was heartbreaking for me. But at the same time, I needed to do that to be able to grow further as a leader and as a person.
So a couple questions for you. What was the mental shift like to go from for-profit to nonprofit? That's my first question. And then I got another one.
Well, first of all, I didn't know what I was doing. I felt like completely out of, here's an example. If I needed support for IT, I called the IT department.
Right.
If I had training needs, I called learning and development. I had an HR issue, I called HR. And guess what? We had none of those things. And all of a sudden, I had to be the CEO and the janitor. It was crazy. I was like, I don't know how to do QuickBooks. I don't know how to work Salesforce. We didn't even have a database when I came in. So I had to start by getting a database. And so it was so humbling because I felt like I knew nothing about the world of nonprofit. The second thing that I noticed was, you know, in corporate America, when they say, okay, go network with like strategic resources, you're learning to network within the company in the different departments. When I came out, it was like, go figure out who's your community. Who are your people? Who's the tribe, right? And I'm like, I don't have one. I had to completely start from scratch. And by the way, I didn't even have a LinkedIn account when I started. So I literally had to start from scratch in terms of Asian American community. And thank God people were generous. Thank goodness people were very generous with their networks and their time in connecting me. But I started from zero. So those were very humbling.
Well, let me ask you the second question about the mental shift. So you're going from for-profit, large company, lots of resources, people working for you to a much smaller organization with fewer people working for you and fewer resources. What's that mental shift, and how do you negotiate that with the parents?
Well, first of all, I was scared.
Yeah.
I was really scared because, well, first of all, I'd never fundraised before. So that was another thing. I had to talk to my parents about, first of all, they didn't know what a nonprofit was. So I had to explain that concept. And then I think on top of that, what I didn't realize about myself were three things. One is I kind of have an entrepreneurial spirit that I didn't know I had. Number two was that I know how to build relationships. That is one of my fortes is I build relationships that are trusting, and that part I knew well. And number three is I had help. I may not know how to do things, but I know a lot of people who knew how to do things. And I just had to ask for help, which was, by the way, very hard. I don't like asking for help.
I hope you've gotten much better at that, by the way. I have gotten much better at that.
Well, there was no other way to survive.
Yeah.
There was no other way to survive without asking for help. And so I really had to learn how to leverage everything that I bring to the table that I learned in leadership and apply it all. And I feel like I do that. I literally, thank you for my 28 and a half years in this company. I literally use everything I bring to the table. And that has been very helpful for the organization. And it gives me a lot of satisfaction knowing that everything that I learned is applicable.
Sue Ann, when and how did you make the decision to go from interim to the president and CEO? Because that's another mental shift, right? When you're thinking, I'm here for a while, I'm caretaking, to I'm running the place and I'm going to do something with this.
There were two things that I recall because it was about a year I was sitting in the interim position. Number one was that I was energized by the work. So that informed me about the mission work that I was doing to help initially AANHPI women. The second thing, Joanna, was during the pandemic, I literally had to shift everything to in-person or things like that. So we had to rewrite the program for the AANHPI. And then the Atlanta spa shootings occurred in March of 21. I literally was marching with community in Atlanta at the Capitol. I got a phone call from the Walmart Center for Racial Equity, and they're like, hey, Sue Ann, obviously you're doing a tremendous amount of work in the space of Asian American women, but what about bringing together women of color? Like, we need more solidarity. We need to make real change. So the Unleash the Shero in You, ! Is the name of the program I created in 48 hours. They're like, it's due Monday, by the way, FYI. It's Saturday and it's due Monday. I'm like, oh, okay. So I literally over the weekend wrote the program. There were some things that I took from the Asian Pacific American Women's Leadership Institute that I felt like was a common thread. But I also was very informed about what women of color were telling me already for feedback about what they need, their challenges, the things that they really need. So I took all of that and put it together in a 8-month program for early career women.
Wow.
5 years or less in the professional workforce. So I took the data from the McKinsey Lean In report. I took what women were providing me in feedback. And then I took pieces of what I knew worked in the AANHPI program and then formulated it that way. So those were, because I felt excited about the creation of some of the things that direct service needs for leadership development, it just got me all excited and motivated.
And then how can you leave?
I can't leave now.
So now you're president and CEO, right?
That's right. I can't leave now. And by the way, it's just me. I did a lot of contracts, 1099, and then I have a part-time assistant, and we're getting ready to grow in the next year or so with probably some staff and whatnot. But it took a while to get to this point.
Well, let's turn to CAPAW. You've got a couple of signature programs. One is the Shero program and the other one is the AANHPI program. So tell us about these programs that really promote leadership. What's special about them?
What's special about it is, one, I always go back to what our founder said, which is I wanted these women to have a community. I don't want them to struggle by themselves, number one. We create a safe space, and we talked a little bit about whole person leader, which means intellectual, it means financial, it means cultural, physical / nutrition. And it's about relationships and building that. It's an inside out approach. I always tell people, if you're looking for how to do strategic management, you want to do, all these different types of intellectual development, go get an MBA, go get an EMBA, if that's what you want. If you want transformation, if you want to focus from inside out, how you become a better person and elevate yourself as a better leader, then you come to us. And so that AANHPI program is more that mid-level women that are AANHPI. And what I find at that level is they've experienced some success already in their lives. But the questions start to come. Is this it? What else is there? I'm thinking about maybe potentially changing sectors maybe, or changing the direction, but I don't know exactly what it is yet. I need to explore. There's a lot of transitional individuals that are coming to our organization right at that time. It's an exploration opportunity. And so we'll do things like, hey, we have a focus on life purpose. We have somebody come and talk about mindfulness and grounding, because guess what? We're doers. Get her done. Do it, do it, do it. We have a hard time sitting still and being, right? So
yeah, totally.
These are, Joanna's like, I can relate. And so can I. I have a hard time meditating. It's just torture at times for me.
Well, I'll tell you how I meditate later.
But at the same time, the answers are there if you can quiet yourself long enough to let the answers kind of float up. And I think that's the key.
So what's interesting about this program is it's leadership development and kind of mental development specifically for AANHPI mid-career women. So it's very targeted to what they're thinking and how they're maybe feeling stuck and thinking about what's their next.
Right.
And what their purpose is. So I see the draw.
And here's the other thing. Maybe they're stuck in their maybe they're in corporate spaces and they're stuck. And so they're questioning themselves about, well, what's next? And there is data. There was a study that was done maybe about 5-6 years ago. At the time, it was Working Mother Media. Now it's Sarah Mount. But they talked about how women in corporate, especially women of color, they hit a wall or they hit a ceiling. They know they can't progress. So they start a side hustle, like an entrepreneurship of some sort.
Oh.
And then there was data that showed that after a couple of years, they may completely shift into entrepreneurship so they can drive their own destiny. And they can be in the driver's seat in terms of what they offer. And I absolutely love that. So that's another example of where data shows a lot of the women of color make that shift, because guess what? They don't want to deal with all of the political issues and the things that they're stuck. And so that's what I see also, is a lot of women who are thinking about their own business.
So how is the Shiro program different? And that came out of the Atlanta shootings.
It is different because it is targeted for women of color. So not just AANHPI women, but Latinas, Indigenous women, African-American women. And the focus is 5 years or less, predominantly in the professional workforce. What I find, a lot of these women have worked since they're maybe 14 or 15 and have continued to work. So my distinction is the professional work experience. And so it's not about age, right? Because there are women who maybe were mothers or they had to step away from work, but it's more about where are they sitting in their career today. I had one Shiro who is a grandmother, but this is considered her first time being in a professional workforce, as an example. And so I don't really focus on age. It's more about where are you in the spectrum of your career.
Totally makes sense, because if you're fairly new in your professional career, that's a different kind of mentoring that you need.
Absolutely. And I love the fact that these women, so they're usually about 25 to 30 in the class, and the network that they have and the support, they're all over the country. They're all different careers. And within that, there's a lot of diversity within whether it's Asian culture, Latina, there's so many diversity elements. And so it gives them an opportunity to share space with one another and really appreciate the different cultural background and just the different backgrounds in general that they bring to the table. And it just expands their reach and their ability to be supported.
You know, you said something really interesting during the prep that is related to this. You said that in order to really end this systemic sexism, racism, every ism, that we need to partner with other organizations and other communities. So how are you doing that at CAPAW?
So, Joanna, thank you for asking that, because I remember during the pandemic, we saw George Floyd.
Right.
Then it moved to anti-Asian hate.
Right.
And then it was the Mexican border issue. And then the Muslim and the Sikh.
Right.
And so I just saw this rotation of the different communities that were being attacked. And I think that when we were talking about the call that came and the fact that it takes solidarity of all these different cultures, that we have to pull them together in solidarity to make the big difference, to really make an impact in addressing racism, sexism, misogyny, all the things that affect women of color. And so that's why we really focus on that part. It's important. Yes, it's an Asian American, Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander organization leading women of color efforts, which you don't see. So this is where I felt it was really important to have solidarity. Even some of the conferences we had. We just had a last week, 2024 Women of Color Conference in Atlanta. And it was, Women's Entrepreneurial Opportunity Project, which is a predominantly African-American entrepreneurial organization. Then you got the American Red Cross, AARP Georgia, AARP National. You've got Georgia Hispanic Chamber. It's going to take all of us to really make a difference in making change, because you're talking systems that are built in that we are trying to change.
Wow, Sue Ann, you've got some big goals, big dreams, and you've got a lot going on in 2024. And now you're fundraising to be able to really support all of this amazing stuff. What's the fundraising climate like these days?
I go back to the relationships. By the way, one tip I learned, those of you who are nonprofit leaders out there, you don't go away just because they don't give you funding right then.
Oh, absolutely. It's not yet.
This is a key learning of what I learned. So I had an individual, this individual was with a very large beverage company, and I didn't get any funding for like 3 years. Then they went to a sportswear company later, and then an insurance company person then replaced that person at this beverage company. Guess what? I got funding from both. So
nice.
But that's a good example of you don't go away just because you don't receive funding right then, because I actually like these individuals. And so I always say I work with people I like. And that seems to be the key to a lot of that. And there are times that, like this year, I hear a lot of corporations say it's a downtime where they have to tighten up on expenses and some of their philanthropic work goes away. But guess what? You still get a table at my conference because you've been supporting us for 20 plus years. I don't go away just because you're having a hard time.
Yeah.
Same thing, several companies like that were tightening their belt, but I don't go away just because. So that's a huge lesson. And I'm also very resourceful. So the second thing is we were doing something with Nordstrom, and I didn't know anybody at Nordstrom in Buckhead in Atlanta. So I Googled it. Then I figured out who the person was through LinkedIn, connected with them on LinkedIn, then figured out their email, and then sent them an email saying, hey, we're trying to do this with another funder. Would you be willing to do it? And I got a response. But you have to kind of be a little bit diligent about going after some of these opportunities because it's a win-win for them too.
Absolutely. And you have to be personal about it and really personalized in your approach.
Right. Personalized, and also what's in it for them. And so those are the things that I learned a long time ago from being in customer service, working with a very highly regulated area. Like, what do you have to do to smooth things over when people are not at their best? And guess what? During COVID, people are not there. They weren't at their best.
Yeah.
And so I learned how to try to help in during those times. And I think that pays off. So it doesn't mean it's always a win, but I feel like the relationships certainly help.
Sue Ann, before we close out, I want to ask you this question. It feels like we're living in an increasingly polarized country with just a lot of tension between the different communities. And what you're really trying to do is bring people up. So how do you know that you're making a difference?
I know because, number one, we do the formal surveys and the different things, of course. But I think, when I hear things like, hey, if you ask us to do something, we're going to do it. Or, we're going to come back and support you. Or it could be that I need something to be done, but I can't do it on my own. And all of a sudden they're mobilizing to get it done because they believe in the organization. It's even some of those things that you can't directly measure all the time. But when the community comes together to get something done, or the partners continue to come back to partner with me and CAPAW, I know we're making a difference.
Sue Ann, this was such a great interview. And listeners, for those of you who unfortunately weren't part of my prep, Sue Ann and I have decided that we are sisters from another mother. And she's in Georgia. I'm in Virginia. We're going to figure out a time and a place to get together.
We will.
Sue Ann, I hope you will come back because I want to hear more about what you're doing and what CAPAW is doing. Thank you so much for an amazing interview.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I really appreciate you so much.
Thanks for listening to Associations Thrive. We're so glad to have you here. My personal mission and the mission of my company, Matrix Group International, is to help associations and nonprofits increase membership, generate revenue, and thrive in the digital space. I want to hear stories of how your organization is thriving in today's challenging landscape. Please apply to be on my show by going to podcast.matrixgroup.net. By the way, do you need help with a digital initiative? Maybe it's a website redesign, a new membership database, or a hybrid meeting that you're planning. I'd love to connect with you. Please visit the Matrix Group website at matrixgroup.net. Thanks again for listening to this week's episode of Associations Thrive. Don't forget to subscribe to the show, leave a 5-star rating, post a comment, and share it with your colleagues and friends. Bye!